Our great Irish poet W.B. Yeats once said about a friend of his, as an Irishman, he keeps an abiding store of tragedy to sustain him through any temporary periods of joy. Looking at my life, I might be tempted to identify with that, but today for me isn't about really dwelling on the sorrows of the past or its trauma. It's about pointing towards joy and happiness. And it's about explaining what I mean when I say happy is as happy does. I was 62 years of age, and I was sitting in the locked ward of a psychiatric hospital in London. It was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and it was the same routine as every night. My door would open every hour, and a nurse would look in to see that I was still there, in every sense of the word. And this particular night, it was a warm summer night. I was sitting by my window and getting some air coming in. And across the parkland, I could hear the sound of an owl, this hooting noise coming from the trees at the edge of the property. And it was remarkable because I was sitting there in a kind of tranquilized fog, trying to keep all feeling, whether it was good or bad, away from me. I just didn't want to feel. And suddenly I heard this creature of the natural world who was out there and free, reaching me. It was a beautiful moment. And so the days went on in that place. And what happened was a gift, a time to stop, to look inside, and to ask, how had I gotten to this place? Because I was full of shame. Here I was, a public man, someone who'd got lots of praise and lots of awards, people slapping me on the back, telling me what a great fellow I was. And I hated who I was. I was ashamed of being the one who had crashed, who had broken. And it didn't matter what the people I loved said to me. I never felt I deserved their love. So if people are telling you that you're worthwhile, that you matter to them, that they dearly love you, in my case I just couldn't hear it because my loathing of myself was so great. It was this iron wall that I had erected. How had that come about? Well, there are two strands to the why and the how. I'd spent 30 years prior to this breakdown reporting on man's inhumanity to man. I'd covered conflicts everywhere. I'd started here in Northern Ireland during the Troubles in the mid-1980s, and it was here I first covered assassinations, bombings, where I learned the universal truth that all widows shed the same tears. Grief is felt wherever you are in a community that is under siege, in families that have seen their loved ones taken away in an instant. From here I went to South Africa, and that was a roller coaster journey. There was great joy because the country was moving from apartheid and racial discrimination towards a non-racial democracy. But along with that joy came resistance from those who didn't want change and terrible violence. I have a vivid memory of being in Soweto Township outside Johannesburg and watching a mother stand over the body of her murdered son, and his blood was leaking out into the dust. And she, from somewhere, got a piece of newspaper and placed it over him, and she was holding it down so that the wind wouldn't blow it away. And there was a striving there which was filled with love. It was trying to give him some dignity in that least dignified of moments, and recognizing the essential, his humanity. From there were many other wars, but the one which is, I suppose, the great mountain in the middle of my life, the before and after, is Rwanda. There I witnessed a genocide, the calculated, planned attempt to wipe out a race of people, when the Hutu majority turned on their Tutsi minority neighbors. And something like 800,000 people were killed in the space of 100 days, most of them with machetes. So it was an intimate killing. I remember Seamus Heaney's great line about this place, each neighbourly murder. And I not only saw the mounds of bodies, lived with the stench of death that I thought I'd never wash out of my clothes or wash off my skin, but also, perhaps more disturbingly, I interviewed many killers, the guys who were on the roadblocks doing the killing. And I realized that they were not psychopaths. It would have been very easy, emotionally, spiritually, to say, okay, they're out of the ordinary, they're crazy, that's why they did it. But no, they were people with families, with jobs, with hopes for their children. People who were capable of love in different circumstances. But they had been turned by propaganda, by fear, into those who would go out and kill their neighbours. Yes, there were, of course, a handful of psychopaths, but that's not the thing that bothered me. It was the part of the human psyche that's in me, that's in all of us, that in the wrong circumstances can be turned towards hatred of another human being. What Primo Levi, the great writer of the Holocaust and survivor, called the bestial vice of hatred. So I came out of that with nightmares, flashbacks, and I took to drinking in earnest. I was always a thirsty lad, I'll put it that way, but after Rwanda it descended into deep addiction. And eventually that got too much and I went and got help. And that was 25 years ago now. I got sober. But a couple of years ago, one of the doctors who'd helped me then said, we picked something else up at the time. It's in your notes, where one of our staff said you showed symptoms of PTSD. And I said, well, what about that? Because, of course, I had been living with those symptoms. Hypervigilance, constantly on the lookout for being attacked. This awful sensation of shivering, shaking, sweating, going pale, feeling nauseous if somebody dropped a plate nearby, or if a car backfired, or if someone I loved came up behind me unawares. And it was, again, I felt shame about this. Who am I, this weirdo going around the place with these symptoms? But because I wanted to keep doing the job I was doing, because I wanted to be a war correspondent, because I craved that visibility, and I also needed the adrenaline that went with the job, I kept doing it. I kept going back and re-traumatizing myself. Now I can look at it from this point of view and think that was absolutely insane. Why on earth would you do that to yourself? But if you'd come from where I came from, I would argue it makes perfect sense. And that's the second strand. It's about childhood. I grew up in a home that was fractured by alcoholism. I learned to anticipate the moods and the actions of adults. I learned how to present myself as meek and unthreatening. I learned how to defuse dangerous situations. And these were all essential skills for a child growing up in the environment that I was growing up in. I needed it. My survival depended on it. And they were wonderful skills as well to transfer into my career as a war correspondent when you're pulling up to roadblocks and you're dealing with people who are drunk and dangerous. You need to be able to talk them down. And I had a great gift for doing that. I could also anticipate trouble, usually 5 or 6 minutes before anybody else could in our team. Great gifts. But now you transport all of that into personal relationships and you have disaster. You've got a guy who cannot trust. A guy who feels he's going to be abandoned all the time. A guy who too often people pleases, tells people in close relationships what they want to hear, whether it's true or not. A man who makes promises he can't keep. And so, by continually going back to the wars, long after I'd gotten sober from alcohol, I was placing myself in continual physical danger, but also building up the stockpile of traumatic images and dangerous situations. The memory of awful moments where I might have died, or when colleagues of mine did die. And eventually, a crack came. I went to hospital. I came out. I went back to the wars. I went to hospital again. I came out. I went back to the wars. You can see what was happening. I was addicted to this. And then, 2 years ago, what I believe, there are no guarantees in this life, but what I believe was the final crash, where I ended up in that hospital. In London, at 3 a.m, listening to the sound of an owl, and the most healing, beautiful thing I'd ever heard. And yes, I had shame at that moment. Of course I did. You see the people who love you coming in and looking at you with this deep concern in their eyes. And I was exhausted. And I was saying to myself, I don't have another one of these in me. At the same time, though, there was the part of me that still had a capacity to appreciate beauty. And that little part was something that I clung on to. And I said, I've got to get out of this. And I'm going to get out of it. And one night in the hospital, I was watching a documentary that had been recommended to me, and in it was an interview with an American psychiatrist, Dr. Phil Stultz, in which he said, if you want to have decent mental health, you've got to accept that life is full of uncertainty. It can be full of pain. And this was the thing that really, really got him. He said, and you're going to have to work for it. In my case, work every single day to be healthy. And so, what did I do? Well, I was in a hospital where I had great therapy, where I was prescribed medication, which for the first time in my life actually worked to temper the symptoms of my anxieties. But the essential work I would discover was the journey of a lifetime. And that was daily practical things, okay? Get up in the morning and take out the dog and go for a walk. And if there's no one else around to talk to him. He's a great listener. Clean the house, not the kind of typical male cameo where you cook a meal or you do the hoovering and you look around for the applause. Men are so good at that. No, do it consistently and regularly without having to be asked or without looking for a compliment. Give time to friends. I had so mistreated my friendships through my obsessive pursuit of praise, of adrenaline. So I made and I now make times for people who are my friends, just to do simple things together. Go to a movie. Go to a rugby match, in my case. Cook a meal. And be the person that your family, the people close to you, can depend on. So nowadays, if I make a promise, I do everything I can to keep it. It was said to me once by a therapist, and we were talking about childhood. And he was reflecting on my need for affirmation, my need to be this heroic figure who proved his bravery time and time again because he'd been a frightened child. And he said, did you never think about what you were achieving when you were that frightened child? Because he said, kids like you who grow up in family homes that are fractured by addiction, by parental discord, by mental illness. It's heroic to survive that and come out and try to make a life. He said, all of those kids, he said, you included, deserve medals and praises. And I thought, wow, such a revolutionary idea, and yet so obvious. And he said to me what so many other therapists and friends have said, just keep going. help others. It's been a key part of my own recovery from alcoholism and from post-traumatic stress disorder. As they say in the world of addiction about sobriety, to keep it, you've got to give it away. Extend yourself and do it in a way that doesn't seek praise and thanks. Just do it for the sake of doing something decent and good. My old addiction counselor, a man called Gordon Duncan, who became a kind of father figure to me, would always call me out when I was talking nonsense. And he said to me, I was in the middle of despair once, and he said, look, Fergal, always remember, you're stronger than you think. And it stuck with me. And I say that to myself every single day. You're stronger than you think. And all of us who were the lost and broken children of this world, who's still going, we are all stronger than we think. So I've no guarantees. There's no certainty that something bad won't happen today or tomorrow or the day after or sometime in the future. But I'm looking for guarantees. I'm happy with where I am today. I have great love around me. And to go back to our feathered friends, I also remember the moment fairly recently when I just had this explosion of clarity. I was walking along a beach in West Waterford near Ardmore, and we came to this river, my partner Elise and I, and we were listening to the sound of the water flowing into the bay. And I then noticed this sound, this whoop, whoop, whoop sound, and looked up. And from over the cliff, just in front of us, came a flock of brent geese, and they soared up into the blue. And I thought to myself, this is it. This is a lightness I have never, ever known. And I felt such gratitude. So today, I'll take what today brings. Tomorrow, I'll get up, I'll open the curtains, I'll make a coffee, I'll talk to the dog, I'll hear his need to go for a walk, and off I will go, knowing that if I keep doing that on a daily basis, if I keep being honest, that's the key thing, keep being honest with myself, then I can make it to a place of contentment. Because happy is as happy does. Thank you very much.
Fergal Keane.